If you want to give it to an hour, I think it's for you to develop real. I just feel
Thank you for just letting me class this year. I had no context.
What's your name, by the way? You guys try out?
Since she left me at yeah. Hey guys. Look what I got.
Oh, okay, okay.
Is it the gold?
I know. Well, we got like less than a minute.
It rained.
Oh my
It
God.
rained only on my part.
Oh, okay, now it's Howdy!
Howdy.
Thank y'all so much for coming again. My name is Patrick Green. This is our second general meeting. We got a lot of great stuff in store for today, so let's just jump right into it. So,
Yeah. Okay, so space news, a lot has happened. So last week, I believe September 25th, we have a new crew on the ISS, but this time we have an astronaut from the United Arab Emirates, and he's the first astronaut from that country, and that's super exciting. He's with Jessica Meyer, who's a NASA astronaut, and she's going to be doing some really cool stuff. This is kind of a really big deal because you're starting to see a lot of smaller countries kind of join the game or field of space exploration, and it just shows that space is like happening right now. And okay, and another really cool thing that came out a few days ago is they found a lot of water on asteroids. So I know a lot of you guys might have heard of mining water on the moon for rocket fuel, but this research kind of showed that, hey, it seems like asteroids are a better place to mine water because there's like more, and it's just a lot easier to land, launch from asteroids for deep space exploration. I'm back again. Okay. And I know if you guys came to the first meeting, we kind of talked about Chandrayaan, because during that time they were going to try and attempt to land Vikram on the south pole of the moon. Unfortunately, it didn't go as planned, and like about at 2.1 kilometers from the surface, so like really close to their landing site, they lost comms with Vikram, and till now they haven't heard from it at all. And NASA apparently put out a statement saying it was a hard landing, and they're trying to like get an image of it using one of our satellites.
Howdy, everybody.
Howdy.
So I'm Alejandro, and this Saturday evening, this past Saturday evening, SpaceX and specifically Elon Musk gave a massive presentation and massive update to the Starship and Super Heavy project. For those of you who don't know, Starship is their spacecraft that they will be traveling with to Mars and carrying, well, what we hope is the beginnings of an actual human colony. So, general gist of the update, they gave some design updates. Instead of 3 fins, it'll have 2 fins, bottom and top with 6 legs on the bottom, and just some height and weight stats there, with 6 Raptor engines now instead of 7. And then they're also updating the design of the actual booster rocket. So the system is Starship, the actual ship, and then the actual booster, which is called Super Heavy. The entire stack is going to be, give or take, about 400 feet high, give or take about 10 feet. And there it is in comparison to the Millennium Falcon. And the hope is to create a reliable, reusable, and cheap system to take humans all across the solar system. So it's a huge update, and they said that they hope to be in orbit with an actual Starship test article within 6 months. And within the year, so next October, November, actual orbit with people on it. So it'll be super exciting, and one day this may actually be a reality. So, yeah.
Okay, so fellowships, I just wanted to bring this up as these deadlines are coming up at the end of the year. So there's 2 main ones that we're endorsing. The first is Brooke Owens. So this is for females and gender minority students who are undergraduate. And essentially, it hooks you up with 2 really cool mentors in the aerospace industry and an internship for the following summer. So the application deadline for that is November 12th. If you have any questions about it, you can come talk to me after, and anything I don't know, I'll refer to Micaiah, who's our previous president, who was a Brooke Owens fellow. So you gotta call him Brookies. So if you're a woman, undergraduate, and you're interested in that, definitely encourage you to apply. And then the Matthew Osakowitz Fellowship. So this is for upperclassmen, so juniors, seniors, and graduate students, male and female. And it's the same kind of situation, pairing you with mentors and an internship the following summer. And the deadline for that is December 2nd. So, yeah.
So, if you guys don't know, I'm the outreach officer. So, SEDS is kind of starting this new thing where we're trying to collaborate with other organizations on campus. And one of the main organizations that we've reached out to kind of do like some sort of collaboration is SWEET, and they're essentially the Society of Women Engineers. And we basically asked them, hey, is there any way we can like help out or do something for you guys? And they're hosting a really cool event called High School Conference in January. So yeah, there's like a pretty long time for that. But they're in need of volunteers, and they're going to be sending out the sign up soon. So we'll be like sending you guys an email. So if you guys need volunteer hours or you just want to help out, please come talk to me, and we'll definitely get you on that. So.
Howdy, everybody.
Howdy.
If you came to last meeting, I'm the design team lead. So really quickly, last meeting I didn't really mention it, but we do have a design team, and we have one of our projects that we're doing has a deadline of October 15th. So if you are interested in that, there's going to be a QR code down here at the end of the meeting that you can come sign up for. If you are already signed up, don't worry, you're already in the lister for emails I'm sending out. So yeah, if you're interested, I'm talking to you later. We can talk about the project.
Just like really quick.
One of our teams is competing in NASA's RASCAL competition that they host every year, and yeah, it's really cool. So you should sign up. So, thank you.
And we'll put that
Oh yeah,
at
that's
the end.
that's it.
Hey guys. Okay, I put them on the next slide. I did for this slide. So this is the t-shirt you decided on. This is the front of the t-shirt that I didn't show you guys, but surprise, it's the SEDS logo. So I am currently
Yeah, once that shirt's up, we'll send you an email with a link, and then the pricing of sizes will be on there, and there will be a deadline for that, and we'll have that all in that email. So stay on the lookout.
All right, so much sooner than anticipated. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So English. I'm an aerospace engineering major, not an English major. Bear with me. So our speaker for tonight, as I'm sure many of y'all have already heard because we keep telling y'all about it. So she's a NASA astronaut, logged over 1,000 hours in space, flying 4 shuttle missions, flying on the Columbia, Endeavour, and the Discovery. On top of that, she's a master Army aviator, logging over 3,900 hours in flight. On top of that, she was the principal engineer for NASA's Engineering Safety Center. And then on top of that, she's now currently a professor of practice here at Texas A&M for industrial engineering. And she also has her own Wikipedia page, which, you know, is pretty awesome. I'm going to be honest with you. So if y'all could please give a warm welcome to Dr. Nancy Curry-Gregg.
Howdy. So, I always warn my students, don't trust Wikipedia, because if you look on there, I think it says I'm an adjunct here or something like that. If you know of who to talk to change your Wikipedia page, let me know, because they kind of ruined this information out there before. But it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I am a professor over in Industrial Systems Engineering, because that's what my doctorate is in. I'll talk about that later, how I ended up with that. But I also have a joint appointment now in aerospace engineering. So I'm able to mentor graduate students in aerospace as well. My background, in addition to being an Army aviator and astronaut, academically, my master's is in safety engineering. That came as a direct result of being an eyewitness to a helicopter accident, of a helicopter that I should have been on, that killed 4 people next to me. And because I wasn't there, a senior officer had hopped in the back to give a no-notice evaluation right who killed the accident as well. So I decided I didn't want to ever have to go through that again, if at all possible. So I got a master's degree in safety engineering, and the root cause of that accident was actually human error. So I have my doctorate in human factors engineering, looking at optimizing design while keeping in mind human performance, both capabilities and limitations. My current research, I do research on spacecraft occupant protection. As you know, most of the next generation vehicles are all capsule designs. That's for a reason. The astronaut office, when I was still there, actually put out a white paper after the Columbia accident and recommended a capsule design, because a capsule design gives you full escape capability from the vehicle sitting on the pad, as in a Apollo 1 fire scenario, during ascent, if you have a launch abort system, and as a safer configuration for entry. But what it does is it exposes the crew to dynamic accelerations at landing. And so we study that just like you would study automotive crashes. So we use finite element models of anthropometric test dummies, crash dummies, and we put those crash dummies in spacesuits and helmets and in our seats and expose them to that same acceleration pulse in the horizontal impact facility at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So that's just a little bit about it. So if you'd like to study any of those, I'm also starting up a research program in looking at ways to mitigate or additional techniques to mitigate neurovestibular effects post-landing. Anybody ever seen a video of a crew member trying to walk after a long-duration space flight? No. Usually they'll blank the face out. If you watch a Soyuz landing, they pull them out of the spacecraft, they put them in a recumbent position, and basically for a pretty long period of time, at least the first few days, crew members have a great great amount of difficulty in just walking. Okay, so the nervous stimular sensations are pretty severe after a long duration, even after short duration. It was pretty interesting. All right, so today's discussion, I'm not going to talk about a variety of different topics, and I do all the time, but the one that was picked for tonight is assessing risk in human spaceflight. We have a saying in my world, which is human spaceflight, which is space is hard. Right? And space is exceptionally hard when you put human beings into those spacecraft. We're not talking about payloads that if the vehicle explodes on the pad, you lose a lot of money. You might have a lot of vendors upset with you. You lose, opportunities for science, but you don't kill people. We kill people in human spaceflight, and we've managed to do that 3 times over the course of the U.S. program, 2 times in the Russian program. And it's significant. It's something that stays with you for the rest of your life. I say that because with the advent of commercial crew, no commercial crew vendor has ever flown humans before. Yes, they've flown payload. Flying human beings is different. It requires a different risk mitigation posture. That's a slide that says, yep, been there, done that 4 times, starting with STS-57 in 1993. We flew the first flight of the Space Hab module, pressurized module. We did 22 different experiments back in that. We also retrieved the European carrier satellite, which was actually deployed before Challenger, supposed to be retrieved a few months later, a few missions later, but because Challenger happened, it stayed on orbit quite a number of years. All flights are good flights. Some are better than others. My 3rd flight, we took up the first piece of the International Space Station. So I grappled the first Russian segment, the FTB, made it to the first U.S. segment. We did 3 spacewalks, then we went inside, turned on the lights, and made the first call to Houston. This is the International Space Station. Ranks way up there on my list of things that were really cool about my career. And then equally cool was working on the Hubble Space Telescope. So that was my last mission in 2002. Why was it my last mission? Because in 2003, the next time Columbia flew, by the way, we were on Columbia. So the next time Columbia flew, of course, is when the Columbia accident happened and we lost the vehicle with 7 of my friends. At that point, we had 70 astronauts who had never flown before. When I came into the astronaut office, we numbered about 80. At the time of Columbia, we had about 145 astronauts, 70 of which had never flown. So now we knew the shuttle was on a timeline to be retired. We knew we had 70 people who hadn't flown. So they created just an arbitrary rule that said, if you've flown 4 times, you're done. I fell into that category. I did opt to stay with the agency right up until the day I came to work here 2 years ago. All right, so here's my mission on March 1st, 2002, walking out of the ONC building, Operations Checkout building down at Cape, down the same ramp that Neil Armstrong. My list of heroes numbers 2. Neil's at the top. I got to know him. The most humble man I've ever met in my entire life, and the most impressive man, who, by the way, after his stint at NASA, anybody know what he did?
Professor.
Where?
At University of Iowa.
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati. So what brought me here in part was following my hero's footsteps, because that's what he wanted to do, is go interact with students. He could have done a lot of different things, and that's what he chose to do. So you're thinking about all the literally tens of thousands of people that it takes to put you into space and keep you safe and bring you home safely. It's not lost on you at any point, training for or during the course of the mission. As an astronaut, you're in a very visible position, but you are a very minuscule member of the team. We're the ones who actually get the pleasure of launching into space and operating the equipment, but it wouldn't be without the tens of thousands of engineers and scientists that it takes to get you there. So what's it like to launch? Hopefully the audio is up. Where's the audio? Oh no, this is no good with the audio, and the audio worked before. Anybody want to provide sound effects in the background? So obviously for shuttle, T-minus 6 seconds to 3 shuttle. Oh, we got to restart that. It's no good without sound effects. All right. So T-minus 6 seconds to come up to full power. Each run produced about 375,000 pounds of horsepower. The vehicle would actually go through what was called the twang, which are still bolts down, but the force of those engines operating at over 1 million pounds of thrust would rotate forward a little bit. Luckily, right when you were back to the verticals, come the solid rocket booster to life, and at that point, 7 million pounds of thrust, propelling you off the launch pad. The vehicle fully fueled weighed about 40 pounds. So by the time you got to the top of the launch tower, that's my little head bouncing around the middle. By the time you got to the top of the launch tower, you're already going 100 miles an hour. Roll heads down to reduce stress on the vehicle. My job on all 4 of my missions, because of my aviation experience, I was a flight engineer, so I sat right behind between the pilot and commander. That's a view looking back down from the external tank back down to the nose of the vehicle. Of course, as you go through the densest part of the atmosphere, max Q, you throttle back the engines. That would happen automatically so that you didn't exceed the stresses on the vehicle. Get out of max Q, throttle back up, and then at 2 minutes and about 20 seconds, the solid rocket boosters will be jettisoned from the vehicle. Can you see it from the inside? Yep, especially at night. Big explosion, big metal clang, and off they go. And then, of course, if you don't know, they were refurbished and reused. So out of the frustrum came parachutes. There were boats waiting, and they would tow them back into port, refurbished and reused those solid rocket boosters. That's when things are right. My late husband, who was also a military aviator, in fact, he taught me how to fly a Black Hawk helicopter, used to say this about the way spouses were treated during a launch, because they would fly down an NASA aircraft and get a lot of support around you. The reason for that was when Challenger happened, they didn't have that. And where were Krista McCullough's parents and the other crew members' spouses? They're in the general viewing area. If the press immediately center on the crew's loved one. So after that point, they had astronaut escorts, the family members would be treated very well. They were treated very well in the event. It was their most memorable day of their lives for all the wrong reasons, in my late husband's words. Because not always do things go according to plan. Because like I said, space flight is hard. It's unforgiving. These are very harsh environments. These are very energetic vehicles that we're dealing with. And when things go wrong, as I'm sure you've seen lots of times, they go wrong pretty dramatically. And so what we know now, and we should have known then, is we need to operate, we being NASA, and I'm still a contractor with them, we being NASA need to operate as a high reliability organization. And so you can see the traits there. Constantly confront the unexpected. I used to keep a pad and a pen by my nightstand every night, because as I was getting ready to go fly, I would wake up in the middle of the night and think, what if? What if this happens? What if this happens? I've got story after story I could relate to you about me coming into work with a what if and having the engineering team not have an answer for me because they thought, uh-oh, we didn't consider that one. Because there are so many failure scenarios that they might not have postulated them all. The other characteristic is you operate with remarkable consistency because you have to. Because when things go wrong, again, because of the dynamics of the vehicle, they go wrong pretty spectacularly. And so you can see what high reliability organizations do. One of the things they do is they are preoccupied with failure. So I give this talk a lot. I give it even to the medical community, chemical community, nuclear community, certainly to aerospace. I'll be talking to Boeing in a few weeks, to the group that's been dealing with the 730 MAX problem. So the reason why we talk about these things and we're preoccupied with failures, so that we hopefully preclude future events. You know, rarely will you ever see in aviation or in aerospace the same accident scenario happen twice, right? What you usually see is an accident scenario that people have underestimated the risk. There's two elements of risk: probability of occurrence and severity of the event. Usually we get the scenario severity of the event. Usually we understand we have an accident during ascent or entry, somebody could get killed early. We usually get that. What we have done multiple times is underestimate the probability of occurrence. Well, still on the inside, I know what the estimates of probability of occurrence is with some of our commercial vendors, and have reviewed some of that documentation. Let me just say, they might be underestimating probability of occurrence too. All right, so preoccupation with phase. What's happened? Obviously, we have, starting with the Apollo 1 fire, I've gotten to know Gus Grissom's son pretty well. He's a little bit older than me. He was in his teens when his dad was killed. He's still affected by that today. I mean, these family members have to deal with this for the remainder of their lives because these are very visible events. Right? Everybody knows the Challenger family, the Columbia family, the Apollo 1 families. Then we have Challenger in 1986. I applied to be an astronaut for the first time in 1985, in 1986, in the fall. This was January 1986. So they had already scheduled up interviews. I got a call saying I was going to be interviewed, and I got a call saying the interviews were canceled, obviously, because it had happened. On the day the Challenger happened, I was out flying an Army aircraft. I was training students. Came back in, and this is pre-internet days. Turning in my aircraft key, and everybody said, "Did you hear what happened?" And I said, "No." And I turned around, and on the TV was a constant loop of Challenger exploding. So I came in eyes wide open. I interviewed in the class in 1987. I did not get selected on my first time. Talked to many astronauts. I would venture to say, I'm not sure there's an exact statistic on it, but the statistic, based on what I know, is about 95% of astronauts do not get in on their first try. And that is by intent. Usually, me excluded. These are really highly talented, very smart people. I don't know how I get in. But they've never been told no in their entire life. And what they don't want is somebody that woke up yesterday and said, "Yeah, that astronaut thing, that sounds kind of cool. I think I'll try that." Because being an astronaut is a lifelong commitment. Because there are ramifications of spaceflight that can affect your health for the rest of your life, for example. Many of us, like myself, I stayed with the agency for 30 years. It's a pretty substantial part of my career that I remain with the agency. So it's a way of life. It's truly your life. It's not just your job. What most people don't know about is the Russian accidents. So they were both pretty early on. And interestingly enough, they were both during entry. And the reason why I bring that up is because, very short story, but on my fourth mission, we had a couple rookies on our flight. The one was a military pilot. And so I had told him that the hardest day of his life is when we go out, they have the beach house at the Kennedy Space Center, when you go out to the beach house and you have to give that talk to your spouse about, here's where my will is, here's my power of attorney, hope I come back. And so we were leaving the beach house after saying goodbye to our spouses. And the pilot said, "You're right, that was one of the most difficult talks I've ever had. It's a military tough talk." And we were talking about wills and so forth. From the back seat, the other rookie popped up and said, "You mean you guys updated your wills?" And we turned around and said, "You didn't?" Honest to goodness, he flew into space without ever updating his wills. And why? Because his entire career in the astronaut office was post-Challenger. We didn't have any accidents. We were flying 6, 7 flights a year. He didn't come in on the heels of Challenger like I did. He didn't have an accident the entire time he was working there. You know, he arranged a really great party. You can't attend your parties because you're in quarantine, but he arranged a really great party for all his guests that came down to watch him fly into space, but he didn't update a will. Now, if you talk to Russian cosmonauts, they thought most of the risk was in entry. Why? Because they'd lost crews and spacecraft during entry. But if you talk to a U.S. astronaut, all on ascent. They're sitting on the pad. Why? Apollo 1 and Challenger. So I flew on cruise 4 times before Columbia happened, where people were having a party, you know. In fact, before landing. In fact, usually when the solid rocket boosters separated, I watched crew members turn off their oxygen and raise their visor. And I heard at least one of them say, There goes 95% of the risk. So with that, let me show you this graphic. If you have not seen this graphic, our safety and mission assurance folks put this together. And what it shows, and I can provide the link to this down at the bottom, publicly available. What it shows is incidents during ascent, incidents during orbit, and incidents during entry. What's that tell you? There's risk in every single phase of it. But people didn't realize that. Now, as I said, preoccupation with failure. What have we known about this? Anybody know about this incident? In a chamber with a cosmonaut before Apollo 1. The Apollo 1 fire scenario happened to a Russian cosmonaut in an altitude chamber before Apollo 1 ever happened. And from that, look at what I bolded, rescue efforts were delayed because the internal pressure prevented opening of the hatch, which opened inward. The same lesson the U.S. learned during the Apollo fire. And there have been information sharing, and I contend maybe Apollo 1 might have turned out a little differently, but we didn't know that for many, many years after. So it's really important to be preoccupied with failures. Here's the Apollo 1 scenario, same thing. Fire in the cockpit, inward opening hatch. Anybody know anything about spacecraft design? We don't do it that way anymore, mostly because we try to protect for egress. All right. Now, for any of the budding aerospace engineers or any other engineer or scientist out there that wants to work, especially in human spaceflight, but any of the spaceflight professions, the Aerospace Corporation has published a document that's 100 questions to ask during the technical review. And for every one of these, have all critical analyses been placed under configuration control? Have all heritage equipment tests and flight anomalies been resolved? For every single one of those is a hyperlink to an accident that actually occurred where they didn't ask those questions. So the one thing about working in the space flight domain is you have to be extremely diligent and study all of the risks and make sure to the extent possible that they're mitigated. The perfect spacecraft, perfectly safe spacecraft, is sitting on a pad, never flies. That's not what they're designed for. We all know that at some point when you light the rocket, there's risk there. But you owe it to the human occupants to drive that risk to the lowest level and also to inform them accurately what the risk is. Did we inform the teacher in space of the true risk of challenges? I would contend not, because our risk assessment at that point was flawed. NASA has something equivalent, and this is 7 elements of flight rationale. So before you say go for launch, you make sure that you have a solid technical understanding of all the issues based on data. Not based on somebody's gut feel, not based on somebody's expert judgment. And why do I say that? Because the experts were wrong during Columbia. Many of the experts said the vehicle's safe to enter. They were absolutely wrong. All right, so what happened on that day? During launch, the accident sequence started to occur. The accident did not happen until 2 weeks later on entry. And what happened was, as you can see from the frame, and let me see if I can rewind it. A piece of foam came off the vehicle. Put that cursor there. Now, how do you know it actually hit the vehicle? How do you know without a doubt it hit the vehicle? You can see the spray of the foam, right? So you know it hit the wing, boom, you see the spray. You see the trajectory change, you see the spray. So we knew without a doubt, actual footage from flight, still photography as well as video, that the foam had hit the tank. So what happens 2 weeks later? 2 weeks later, I was not working this mission, by the way. I was at home on a Saturday morning, getting ready to go to the gym with my husband, watching NASA TV and watching what I thought was going to be just a routine entry and landing. First thing that got my attention is they were late. You don't show up late for landing, right? We're pretty skilled at our entry trajectories and landing time approximations. Loss of comm, late for entry. I knew without a doubt we'd lost the crew. Shortly thereafter came this picture through CNN from an Apache helicopter being flown at Fort Hood, Texas. Video evidence of breakup of the vehicle. Now, what are they doing in mission control? They're sitting there looking at data. What happened to the data? Data went stagnant. Okay, so the data goes stagnant. They don't have any vehicle video of the vehicle at that point. All they know is data static. They can't establish communication. My friend who flew with me on SDS 109 was Capcom, kept repeating over and over again, Columbia, Houston, Columbia, Houston. So, 200,000 feet, vehicle breaks up. Basically, the debris path went pretty much from Dallas, Texas, across Texas, and into the western portion of Louisiana. We had no idea, although we should have, why we lost the vehicle. One of the first teams I was put on after the accident, or one of the first things I was asked to do, in the first 24 hours I was deployed to the fields of East Texas to recover the crew remains, which we did for 2 weeks. After that point, then we went and recovered the vehicle. And when we recovered the vehicle, we tried to rebuild it down at the Cape. We recovered about 40% of the vehicle over a period from February 1st till late May of that year. You want to talk about an overwhelming feeling? Walking through the woods of East Texas and you look down, there's the hatch of the vehicle that you flew on the year before. Twisted metal hatch, laying in a bunch of woods. Pretty overwhelming experience. So, why did it happen? 3 reasons. Physical cause, cultural cause, organizational cause. Physical cause, the foam did it. A bunch of engineers who should have known, and I mean lots of engineers who should have known basic physics, didn't realize that a piece of foam less than 2 pounds could take out a 200,000 pound rover. Right? But it's basic physics. Cultural issues. You can read it there, rooted in NASA's history. What is NASA's history? Can do. Hard charging, can do. We can do this. I used to say we made the difficult look routine. And we made it look so routine that when I got married after my second flight, my own mother-in-law, even though I told her not to, bought a non-refundable ticket to the Cape. Never do that. If you're trying to go see a launch, we slipped. She went to the Cape anyhow and said, catch the next one. So I even had close relatives and friends say, I'll catch your next one. Because it was so routine, right? You go up, you come down. Organizational issues. They clearly stated the shuttle program, NASA in general, does not manage like a high-risk organization in the manner in which we should. How does a 1.67 pound piece of foam take out an entire orbiter? Basic physics. The foam is traveling with the vehicle stack up until the point that it's liberated. When it liberates, the ballistic characteristics of that foam cause the foam to decelerate. The stack does not decelerate. The stack, leading edge, flies into the piece of foam. Delta velocity, 545 miles per hour. Kinetic energy equation, 1/2 mv squared. It didn't matter what the m, the mass was, velocity squared at those velocities, catastrophic level of kinetic energy improvement. This is a test that was done at Southwest Research. They fired blocks of foam at a wing leading edge. This is what happened. for a second to see if it plays. But basically what happens is catastrophic. It's hesitating. Catastrophic damage to that camera is located inside the wing structure, blows about a 19-inch hole into the wing, unbeknownst to the crew. This is during entry. So for 2 weeks on orbit, they've got almost a 2-foot hole in the wing. People on the ground are discussing it. Is there damage to the vehicle or not? Believe it or not, this is one of the few, if not only, missions we didn't have a robotic arm on. So we couldn't go out and look. There were requests made to use what I will term other sources available. They never left the agency because we would have had to ask other agencies for that data, and they said, no, we don't need that. We know it's safe. So when they came in an entry, unbeknownst to the crew, they came in with a 19-inch hole, superheated plasma went into the wing structure. That's where all the wiring is. So all those indications that the ground team's dealing with, all this failure signature that didn't make sense, was all the wiring getting burnt through. And then finally, catastrophic damage to the wing. That's the probable amount of damage based on ground testing to the wing. When you read that statement, management practices overseeing the program were as much as the cause as foam hitting the wing, that tells you how serious human spaceflight is, regardless of what your position is within that organization. Notice I have one of the things that we did very proactively, and I say we because after I came back from being in the field, I got a call one day, and they said, we need a favor. We want you to run the Space Shuttle Safety Program. And I said, not me. And they said, no, we really need you. And I gave them every reason why. I said, I'm emotionally invested in this accident. These were all my friends. The astronaut office is not that big. I knew them, I knew their spouses, I knew their kids. I was in the field immediately after the accident recovering crew remains. And they said, that's why we want you. You're so passionate. I said, I'm going to be that program manager's worst nightmare, which I think I did. But one of the things we knew we needed to do is proactively solicit alternate positions. And we say alternate, not dissenting, for a reason, because even saying somebody has a dissenting position has a negative connotation to it. Because we had engineers at NASA that did that energy equation and really felt like that vehicle was unsafe to enter. And yet, one of them was called Chicken Little in an email that's in the accident report. Somebody reported to him, he's just Chicken Little. Just ignore what he's saying. Even though what he was saying was grounded in engineering truth. And so we had to go through a process to retrain every manager in the agency, stop a meeting, ask, is everybody on board? Does anybody see this differently? Does anybody have a concern that we haven't addressed? Do you think we've properly characterized the risk? Charles Perrault wrote a book called Normalization of Deviance. Anybody heard that term? And what it says is you repeat that process of accepting things that just aren't right over and over and over again to the point where you normalize it. So, in an aircraft sense, if you had an aircraft with an engine that wasn't running out of spec but was always running at the red line, I've heard people say, yeah, that's just the way that engine runs. Not, hey, that's a precursor to failure. So we normalize the fact that on every single mission, after we stopped painting the tank, that we lost foam. So the rationale went like this. If we had over 100 missions where we lost foam and nothing bad ever happened, why would it happen on 113? It did. That's probability and statistics. On the Columbia Accident Investigation Board was Dr. Sally Rock. You know her, right? Famous U.S. female astronaut, first female in space in the U.S. She was also on the Challenger Accident Investigation Board. And it didn't take her long to coin this phrase, echoes of Challenger, meaning we made the same mistakes over again. we didn't properly characterize the risk. Now, different technical risks. As I said, rarely do two accidents happen for the same technical cause. But they happen if there's a culture in the organization where they squelch alternate positions, where they don't have rigorous analysis, where they don't properly characterize the risk, and you should be wary of those types of organizations. One of the things they did after the Columbia accident is they created this independent technical authority for engineering and safety. Now, I think what the accident board had in mind was this aerospace corporation type of paradigm, but instead what we did within NASA is we created a separate organization with separate funding. So if I'm an engineer and I want to do some analysis, I don't have to go to a program manager and say, we need to do this test or we need to do this analysis and it's going to cost you this amount of money. Will you pay for it? More times than not, a program manager who's trying to balance his technical risk, his cost, and the schedule is going to say, I don't have the money or the time or the interest in doing that additional engineering analysis and test. And so to preclude that, if you have a separately funded engineering organization, we can sit there and say, you know what, we think they're wrong, we're going to go off and do our own test. So it is an organization with a $50 million a year budget, spread out over all 10 NASA centers, and we look at all the risk across every program and project in NASA. I specifically looked at the human spaceflight risk. One of the reasons for that is you could see one of the accident investigation report quotes, although from a grammatical perspective it's not quite correct. But what he said about the safety organization is there is no there there. And the reason that came to be is because the accident board continually asked where were the safety guys during these discussions about whether the vehicle was safe to enter or not. And everybody's response is, well, they were there. They didn't speak up. They didn't raise any issues. They were there. They were in the room. You can't have a silent safety organization. And the same thing happened during Challenger. Safety guys didn't speak up, didn't challenge. They just accepted. So the NASA Engineering and Safety Center, which was established in July of 2003, was established on three basic tenets: strong inline checks and balances of our engineering organization, value-added independent assessment, so we can go off and do an independent assessment, independent test, independent analysis of any major issue that might be going on, and then the one I love the best, very well described, healthy tension between engineering and the programs and projects, and healthy professional tension. Never let a professional argument go to a personal level, but definitely healthy tension from a professional perspective. So what do we do at the NASA Engineering and Safety Center? It doesn't matter whether it's a manned project, unmanned project. We look at areas of risk, do our own separate analysis, our own separate tests. For example, I can't give you any of the details, but we had a manufacturing issue with the heat shield on Orion. The manufacturer studied it for a brief amount of time, a couple of months, couldn't figure it out, and changed the architecture of the heat shield. There's a different heat shield that will fly on the next mission that flew on EFT-1, the first mission of Orion. It's got its own set of unique challenges and risks. The initial heat shield design was based on Heritage Apollo design. And we so accurately replicated what they did on Apollo that we managed to replicate the same manufacturing issues that they had, which was when we put the blader in Cure, it cracked. You don't need to crack the blader, right? Because then you have a source for the hot gases to get for the back shield. So that's just one example. Another area that was funded out of that is our spacecraft occupant protection. We had never done crash test dummy testing in the whole history of human spaceflight, neither on the Russian side nor the U.S. side. Now we have requirements not only for NASA vehicles, but for our commercial partner vehicles as well, have to do this analysis and test. So what are we doing on the NASA side for commercial crew? We're ultimately responsible for the safety and performance requirements being met of those vehicles. So we made those specifications, handed them on to the commercial vendors, but ultimately NASA has accept those because they would be putting NASA astronauts on those vehicles. So you're not taking the government completely out of the loop. Some people contend that commercial crew isn't a whole lot different than shuttle. Well, shuttle was, designed and built by commercial vendors, operated by commercial vendors, but there is a slightly different paradigm in today's commercial spacecraft relationship with NASA. So why do we continually talk about failures? They're not just historical events. They could be precursors to future events, and we could replicate the same type of scenarios, different technical reasons, that we have in the past, whether it be Apollo 1, Challenger, Columbia, or even the entry accidents that happened early on in the Russian program. And so those crew members didn't want us to stop when those accidents happened. All of us that took the risk to fly in space knew that we had a risk we might not come home. Every single one of my missions, I wrote a letter to my daughter, gave it to either my best friends. On my first flight, she was 6 years old and I was a single mom. My best friends took care of her and I gave them a letter and said, when she gets older, if I don't come back, give her this letter so that she understands why I took the risk that I did. All of us get that. All professional astronauts get that. And so whether it's paying customers on a spacecraft, space tourism, they're still taking a risk, and they have to understand what that level of risk is. That's called due diligence to those who are going to ultimately accept that risk. And so spaceflight's hard, it's risky, but it's well worth it. We have gained so much knowledge. It is in the human gene to explore. And that next frontier to explore is space. Right? So we have to keep going on well out of low Earth orbit. In 1989, President Bush, first President Bush, said we're going back to the moon and on to Mars. I was in the astronaut class in 1990. On our patch, moon and Mars. We thought we were the guys and gals. That didn't quite turn out, unfortunately, but we were committed. We were it. Right? Political situation changes, economic situation changes, and here we are, how many years later? Almost 30 years later, we're still trying to get back to the moon on Mars. And so hopefully you guys and gals are the ones to get us there. Hopefully you have it in your blood to continue to explore space just like those that preceded you and carry on that exploration challenge. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
All right, so it's time for Q&A. If you all have any questions, just please feel free to raise your hand and ask. We're going to also be fielding questions from the live stream from Texas A&M Galveston or whoever else might be watching. So howdy. So fire away.
You didn't ask me anything.
So now I have two questions. One, which airframes do you fly for Big Army? And the other one, do you believe that SpaceX will actually get contracts with NASA, considering ULA is supposed to be the more safe option?
So, first question is, I flew 258 Cobras, Blackhawks. Second question, SpaceX. As you know, they have a contract to be one of our two commercial providers. And you are talking commercial to and from station, right? Yeah. So they're one of our two commercial providers. They will fly, I don't think it'll be this year, but they will fly in the very near future. And as well as Boeing. And in fact, they have already, they've already released those contracts for multiple flights. Crew members are already trained on those platforms.
Oh, wait, really fast, before the next question, could you just raise your voice a little bit so
Sure.
you can hear us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
What do you think about the SpaceX capsule avoid system launch failure that happened recently?
Spaceflight is hard. Luckily, it wasn't a human spaceflight mission, right? So our commercial vendors are learning the hard way that there are multiple failure events that can end up with catastrophic consequences, and it's hard. Right? I can't say too much more about that because I've done some independent analysis with the NASA Engineering and Safety Center, but to the extent possible, we'll try to characterize those risks and try to prevent those risks. Yes?
Can you explain what it feels like to do a spacewalk?
So I didn't get to do a spacewalk. I'm 5 foot. I am first percentile female. I actually designed a small EMU. We had to modify the shoulder bearings. We canted them in. The problem with a small crew member in a suit that's too big for him, in a pressurized suit that's like pressurized 4.3 psi, if your shoulders are not very wide, then what's in the shoulder region is now your upper arm. And so when you try to reach things, you're like this. And so we canted the shoulder bearings. We did some not very extensive modifications. And it was going to be $5 million for 2 flight units, 2 train units. And the program manager at the time decided not to spend those funds. And guess what? We're still flying those suits. And so it came up again recently, right, in the news, that we don't have any small suits. We've got 2 mediums, but in this case, we've only got 1 medium on orbit, and we have 2 female crew members. So the females that are flying on station today, and especially early on, one of the caveats was that you had to be able to be EVA qualified and fit in the suit. At one point, that took out 80% of the females in the models, not eligible to fly on the station. So that is a long-lasting consequence of that decision that was made in the early 2000s not to have a small spacesuit. Not that I have a personal opinion about that. Interestingly enough, they went to just medium and large for cost savings, but somehow an extra large snuck into the inventory, and some of the large guys got a little bit too large for the large, and so that was okay, but on the small end, it was never addressed, and we still live with that today. And so one of the things that I'm adamant about, I can show you a chart because I am vertically challenged. We gave briefings up through the agency. I think at one point we had about 12 different systems on the list. It might have been more than that. And it ranged from the T-38 ejection seat to all the shuttle equipment, including the escape pole in the shuttle. And it said, what are a certain percentile of small people, almost every single one of them female, out of the safety range, out of the range of specifications for those systems. I was out of the range except for one system. The only thing I did was properly fit in the shuttle seat. But if I had to bail out of the shuttle, I was going to send all my fellow crew members in front of me, and then I was going to take a seat along with me to give me more mass so that I cleared the wing. Because if you know anything about the shuttle, it was a telescoping pole. You would slide down, you'd hook up your parachute system to it, slide down to make sure you cleared the wing at my mass. The analysis was I probably wouldn't clear the wing, and that would be what I would call an all-time worst day. Going through a scenario where you need to bail out, bailing out, and then hitting the wing on the way. Yes?
Why in the world does it make spacesuits actually look like people? Why not make spacesuits be more of a like rectangular prism thing with a bunch of grabbers that could be easily controlled from the inside?
It depends on what the purpose of the spacesuit is for. So mobility is key. You're doing a spacewalk to go do work. In fact, John Young, bless his heart, when he was alive, was notorious for getting very angry at people for addressing him or introducing him as one of the individuals who walked on the moon. And the first thing he did was to challenge him and say, no, I worked on the moon. I didn't just walk on the moon. And so the reason for a spacesuit is to enable mobility and work. That mobility requirement is different in a planetary sense than it is in a microgravity sense. In a microgravity environment, your lower body is nothing more than a fixture, right? And so that's why we have foot restraints that we use. That's why we put a foot restraint in the end of the robotic arm, because your lower body mobility really doesn't assist you in doing work. But in a planetary sense, when you're doing exploration type duties and taking samples, then you need full mobility full range of motion in your lower body as well. Yes.
Well, just an expansion on that. Was there ever a design study to make some? Maybe that's what the previous question was about. Why wasn't there a push for something like a deep sea? What a lot of deep sea companies use for like monitoring oil pipelines and stuff, like the personal one-man submersible that goes down and has grabber units and arms that can telescope out. Could have there been a pressurized version for vacuum and microgravity
think
work?
About that. Okay, so let's use Hubble repair, because after the Columbia accident, they declared that all flights would only go to the station, and that way, if the vehicle was damaged during ascent, they could use station as a safe haven, and then we could send multiple vehicles up and eventually get the crew down. When they did that, they looked at what robotic system can we use to go service Hubble. None. No existing robotic system could go service Hubble, with one exception, I would say, and it wasn't ready yet, program that I worked on, Robonaut, because it's dexterous. Otherwise, all the interfaces are specific between that robotic system and the end item. So it greatly decreases your ability to be flexible. You basically have to pre-plan everything in that case and make sure that you have compatibility between your manipulator and the end item that you're trying to repair or maintain or interface with. And you take away a lot of the flexibility. The other thing you do is create a logistical problem, right? So now if you need a multitude of grabbers to go work on a multitude of systems, every single one of those has a volume and a mass associated with it, which you now have to launch. And so it's not very feasible. There's probably a study you can reference. It's called the Fisher-Price study. It's not the toy company, but you guys at NASA. And the Fisher-Price study looked at, looking ahead before we ever built the space station, could we robotically maintain it, or did we need EVA capability to build and maintain it? And they came down on the side of we need EVA capability. And I think we're still there.
What are some of the validation procedures that you have to go through to get new spacecraft approved? Like when we're coming up on Gateway and Artemis and all of that, like what in the commercial crew program, like what, and especially for commercial crew program, is NASA responsible for validating, or are there companies responsible for validating?
The company is responsible for providing the data to show they meet the requirements. But NASA's role in that is to verify that analysis or test that they're bringing forth to show that they in fact have met those requirements. So one of the things, and I teach multiple courses. One of the courses I teach, interestingly enough, based on my talk, human error resilient system design. Another class that I teach is quantitative risk analysis. And in quantitative risk analysis, on day one, and 2,000 times during the course of the semester, what I tell my students is never give a point solution. There is no such thing as a point solution in engineering. There's always uncertainty. And it's all about characterizing the uncertainty, expressing that level of uncertainty that's important in risk acceptance. Right? So when we do probabilistic risk analysis, which all of our commercial vendors are doing, and they might say, I'm meeting this, 1 in 200 requirement, maybe NASA's established, and 1 in 200 seems to be the going rate, if you will, for accepted safety spacecraft. What's the uncertainty around that? What's the uncertainty, and what is the leading driver in that uncertainty? What's the leading driver in the risk? Anybody know the leading risk driver in the International Space Station? No, human errors, but human errors, at least in shuttle, human error is number 5, but it was crew fails to lower the main landing gear, which the crew office really wasn't buying that analysis at all. We weren't going to forget to lower the landing gear. It's MMOD. One risk that we really can't do a whole lot about except for shielding, right? You can shield, which will take out some of the risk. And actually, at one point, the Russians didn't quite view MMOD risk the way we did, and we had to convince them to put additional shielding on their vehicles. So for a long time, the Russian elements in the station were the leading risk drivers, including the Doc Soyuz and the Soyuz bomber.
What is MMOD?
Oh, micrometeorite orbital debris.
Okay.
All right, so the clock is struck 8. So officially, the meeting is about to end, but Nehal has to say one more thing. Thank you so much, Dr. Nancy Kerrigan, for
Hey guys, I know last meeting we talked about space vision. We even kind of sent out a few reminders and goal cards. If you are really interested and you haven't purchased the tickets, please do that ASAP because I am booking the hotels by this Friday. And if you haven't done that and if you haven't notified me, then you won't have a room. And if you decide to go to Space Vision, we don't know, you have to take care of all the travel arrangements. So make sure you let me, Lindsay, or Patrick, or any of the officers know that you are absolutely going. You have a question about Space Vision?
All right, then. Thank you all so much for coming. That concludes our second general meeting. If y'all have any more questions for us, we're going to stay around for a little bit and answer whatever you want. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Good night.
Okay. Thanks, guys, for tuning in on the live stream. I know the audio was a little bit but we'll go ahead and take those recommendations. We'll take those recommendations and see if we can fix up the audio for the next general meeting and for the general meetings afterward. Until then, at Astra, and yeah, gig 'em.